The Holy Gospel according to St. John, the 6th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for all these people to eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." When Jesus realized they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat. And they were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I. Do not be afraid." Then they wanted to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the land towards which they were going. The Gospel of our Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
So we leave Mark's Gospel this week, and now we find ourselves in John. And we're going to be here in John for the next 5 weeks. And all of our 5 readings, to one degree or another, are about bread. And we start with a familiar story, the feeding of the 5,000, the only miracle that is recounted in every gospel. I'm sure you know the story well. 5 loaves and 2 fish feed a crowd of over 5,000. And there's even leftovers. It's a story of God's abundance. Not only does God provide, but God does so in excess. It's a beautiful reminder for our own lives that the life-giving things that come from God, love, healing, forgiveness, they are abundant. So we do not have to worry about running out of chances or wonder how you can possibly love a new pastor as much as you love Pastor Dennis. Because love is something we have in abundance. Loving someone new doesn't take away love you had for someone else first. There's enough love to go around, and then some. We see that in today's story. There is enough to go around, and then some. And the people are blown away by witnessing God's abundance. They wanted to take Jesus and make him their king, like a write-in candidate winning an election. And who could blame them? The people gathered had their needs met. They were hungry and Jesus fed them. Somehow, by some miracle beyond comprehension, everyone was fed. Now, John's gospel specifies that the loaves were barley loaves. It's the only gospel that makes such a specification. And the significance of barley loaves is that this is the bread of the poor. It's also the same bread in the story of Elisha that we heard in our first lesson. Now, we don't know the socioeconomic makeup of the crowd that was gathering here. Maybe they were all poor, maybe it was a mix, but we at least know by the barley loaves that this one particular boy was poor. God uses whatever we've got. God uses the bread from an unnamed foreigner to feed 100 people through Elisha, and God uses the food of an unnamed poor child to feed 5,000. We find God at work through the most unexpected people and places. When I was living in Berlin, the year after I graduated from college, I didn't make the wisest choices when it came to how I spent my money. It was my first time on my own, and I admit I failed to plan ahead. Spent a lot of time out with friends, and needless to say, as the year passed by, my stipend began to dry up. So I had to make some sacrifices. One of the things that I did was I biked everywhere because it was free, and I didn't have to pay for the monthly public transportation ticket. And let's be honest, at this point my diet pretty much consisted of rice and lentils. So one day while biking to work, I got a flat tire. And I wasn't that far from the chemistry lab where I was interning, so I walked the rest of the way and figured, I'd figure it out later. And now I don't know exactly what I was thinking, except that I was bound and determined not to buy that U-Bahn ticket. So on the way home, I decided, it's a nice spring day. I don't have anywhere to be. Why not? I'll walk home. It was over 7 miles. But I walked, pushing my bike, and I got a little more than halfway. And this also speaks to my ignorance of bicycle mechanics. There's some sort of rubber strip that fell down and got stuck in the wheel. So now the wheel won't even turn. So at this point, I've had it. I'm tired, I'm hungry, I'm hot and sweaty. I'm realizing how foolish of an idea this was. And it was looking like it's all for nothing, because now I'm going to have to break down and buy the bus ticket anyway. And so I'm bending down, I'm looking at this wheel, trying to figure out what this rubber thing even is and how it got there, when this man approaches me and offers to help. Turns out he owned the shop that I had stopped in front of, and he offered to leave my bike there and give me a ride home. Now I'm a little bit unsure, because at this point, I'm 22, and I'm female, alone in a big foreign city, and this man is maybe 40-something. He's a stranger, and then after a little bit more conversation, find out he's Palestinian. All I can think about is the horror stories you hear about situations like this, and how tragically they end. But finally, after some more conversation with this man, I let go of my fear, and I accepted the offer. Because I was tired and hungry and defeated. So we left my bike inside the shop where he worked, and I let him drive me home. And so of course I'm on high alert, thinking of all the worst case scenario things I've learned, ready to pretend to get sick so he pulls over, or not really tell him where I live. I'm hyper vigilant here. And just as I'm about to say, okay, this is far enough, I'll walk, he stops the car and says, wait a minute, and gets out. So now I'm thinking, okay, what's going on? Should I just get out now and run home? Like, what's he going to get somebody? But I see him go into the restaurant that he stopped in front of. And sure enough, he comes back in with a bag of food. He had bought me dinner to take home with me. And compared to the rice and lentils that I'd been eating, this was a feast. I don't even know how he knew I was hungry. And he never asked me for anything in return. God works in the most unsuspecting people and places. God works with what you have. God works with all that you have, not just the good stuff, not just your strengths, but anything you've got. Anything you're willing to offer up and let go of, no matter how ridiculous you think it sounds. Just be ready to let go, because once Jesus gets his hand on those loaves and fish, they don't belong to just the boy anymore. So if you've ever had those days or those weeks when you muddle through, feeling stuck in the messiness of life, distracted by grief, distracted by uncertainty, God uses that too. I have said a few times in my life, a few times just this week, okay, God, I'm tired, I'm cranky, I'm distracted, and I'm upset that things aren't going my way. That's what I've got. Can you use it? It sounds ridiculous, but so does feeding 5,000 with such a meager meal. That offering sounds ridiculous too. But we offer what we have, good and bad, and we let go. Trust God to do something awesome with it. After the people eat and are satisfied, Jesus commands his disciples, gather up the fragments left over so that nothing may be lost. The lesson doesn't end after everyone is full. We've learned so much already, but the story goes on. Jesus gathers up the leftovers, the hard, crusty pieces that nobody wanted, the pieces that got dropped on the ground and trampled by the crowd, the unwanted, rejected pieces that people's bellies had no room or no use for. Jesus gathers up the broken pieces so that none are lost. The fact that they are broken does not disqualify them for being used to sustain life. In fact, in order for the miracle displaying God's abundance to work, the bread must be broken. And so it is with Jesus. Jesus retreated in solitude when they tried to make him king, because in order to fulfill his purpose, he had to be broken on the cross. Jesus comes to us. Jesus meets us in the abundant feast, and Jesus comes to us in the darkness and fear. Immediately after this, even with full bellies and baskets full of leftovers, the disciples were terrified in the dark, stormy sea later that same evening. When you are broken, cast aside, rejected, needy, lost, Jesus gathers you in and uses whatever you have in you to spread God's abundant grace to all. You don't have to get all your stuff together or break bad habits or end unhealthy patterns before God will use you. God comes to you, and God uses things that are broken and people that seem insignificant in ways that are unimaginable. So you don't have to get it all together. Let's be honest, it's never going to happen. Just be ready and be willing, because you're not going to stay the same either. God transforms. God transforms a meager meal into a feast. God transforms death into life. God transforms weakness into strength, restlessness into peace, grief into something bearable. So even if you're just getting by in the messiness of life, you've all got a little bit of something, and God can work with that.
Did you want to sing a hymn?